Putin claims his war economy is doing just fine, but is there another blow to Putin's oil-rich war machine coming down the pipeline? Literally. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about how Ukraine is sticking it to the Russian oil war machine. Okay, so this is one of those stories that sound pretty boring, but is pretty significant. And that is a Russian gas transit deal that is going to end on December 31st. And Ukraine is not going to renew it. Now, here's the story, right? There is one pipeline that moves gas, natural gas, through Europe, or from Russia into Europe. And the Russians sell the gas, right? The Europeans buy it, and the Ukrainians collect what are called transit fees, right? They get money for in exchange for basically having the pipeline pass through their territory. In fact, the metering station for this pipeline is in Sudzha, right? Currently in occupied or liberated Russia. Now, the fact is that throughout this war, both sides, Russia and Ukraine, agreed to keep the pipeline open. The reason is, of course, they both were getting paid. They both thought they were getting a good deal. But Ukraine has finally said, listen, we're not getting a good deal. The Russian war machine is fueled by its ability to sell oil, and pipeline pumped oil is not subject to Russian sanctions. This is a huge problem for Europe and Ukraine. Is that when the initial sanctions were rolled out 2 years ago, the proposal was to ban oil imports only by sea because Hungary demanded that in order to ensure its oil is still cheap, that it can receive its oil via Russian pipelines, right? That's about 800,000 barrels a day, exempted from all sanctions, right? And Germany and Poland have done totally promised that they're absolutely totally going to stop buying Russian oil. But just like your friend who's going to cut back on his drinking next month, they're never really going to do it. But Ukraine has now decided, listen, Europe, you're not going to have a choice. And I'm rooting for it, right? Because Europe spends a lot of time hand-wringing, and European officials go to conferences and they pontificate about the need to take action on climate change. And European action on climate change is pretty minimal. In fact, they spend more time shutting down nuclear power plants than they do building new sustainable energy sources. So, I'm happy to see Ukraine say, listen, you're funding a European war by an aggressor, and by your own admission, you're contributing to climate change. Why don't we just solve this and stop letting Russian oil pass through our territory, right? Now, the Europeans have had a long time to deal with this, as they point out. The European Commission, Ukraine says, listen, non-Russian gas can flow through our pipelines, and we're happy to work with them, right? But Ukraine also points out that Europe has had a lot of time to find sufficient energy supplies for their country, and that post-COVID inflation surge has largely abated. And so Europe is best positioned right now to navigate the shutdown of this pipeline. Particularly, again, this is something that's going to be particularly bad news for Putin, and hopefully not terrible news for Ukraine. But all is not well in the land of the EU, right? Because some of their countries are still in seethe and cope mode. But before we talk about that, I wanted to mention that if you want to check out the fighting on the front line, including the front lines in Kursk, that footage just dropped today over on combatvetnews.com. This is my version of Patreon. You want to become a member, sign up, get yourself support the channel, and get access to dozens, maybe even hundreds of uncensored combat videos going back to the start of the war. And most recently, we've started getting combat videos sent to us from units on the front lines that I linked up with, right? So some of these videos are exclusive to this channel. So check it out. Link is in the description. Okay. Here's what else I thought was interesting. Slovakia's prime minister is real mad, right? Robert Fico saying that Slovakia may consider appropriate measures against Ukraine if it does not continue to allow gas to transit from Russia. Right now, Fico claimed he was stunned by Ukrainian President Zelensky. This is pure Russian propaganda, by the way, because there's nothing stunning about this. We've actually talked about this deal expiring literally 6 months ago. So the fact that he's pretending like this is some big offensive decision, and I want to point out that Ukraine is under no obligation to allow its enemy to conduct business on its own territory, right? The Ukraine is not obligated to fund the Russian war machine with its own turf, right? And this is absolutely preposterous. Now, I understand Slovakian Prime Minister says, oh, well, it's really important to keep this route open because gas can't get more expensive. That would be bad. But I point out, again, this is an event that Slovakia has had years to pivot to. And while they, right, Slovakia has done very little to make this pivot. And again, this is something where you want to be an EU member country, you got to play by the EU's rules and values. And one of those values is an effective response to climate change. So I just can't help but roll my eyes at the fact that this is, again, like your neighbor that does nothing to repair the roof in their house and then gets rained on and then goes and tells you, oh man, dude, how could you not help me? How could you not, let me in your house because mine is flooded? And it's like, brother, you had all the time in the world to fix your problem and you didn't. And now you want to make it my problem? This is ridiculous. So again, this is something where you see just Europeans just absolutely being kind of insufferable. I don't know what else to tell you. And of course, they're not alone. Hungary and Turkey also demand the right to buy Russian gas, right? The U.S., they say, we want an exception from the U.S. Sanctions regime. We want to buy Russian gas via Gazprom Bank. And we want to fund the Russian war machine in exchange for a slightly cheaper gas. And again, this is something that drives me crazy because gas prices are lower than they've ever been. This doesn't confer a ton of benefit to these countries, right? And they've had so much time to pivot to alternatives that it's just all it is making the Russian war machine able to last longer. So again, it's just hard for me to sit there and see the disconnect between the European Union and the EU countries' lip service for Ukraine and then their actual willingness to. And this is one of the themes. If there's a theme of this channel, it's this. It's that the difference between lip service and actual support is just so vast. And the unwillingness to make hard decisions, right? The fact that the West, Europe and the United States, we've deluded ourselves into believing that you can kind of you can win a war through sort of limp-wristed, costless actions, right? Things that don't cost you anything and you can win a war at no expense to you. Guys, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist, right? It's like thinking you can win a marathon and not run hard. It's just not possible, right? And even if you think you are the faster runner, if you don't run at a fast pace, if you slack off, if you chit chat, you're going to lose to somebody who's maybe not the strongest runner, who's committed, who's focused, who's setting a pace and breathing hard and pushing themselves. And so that's, I think, the situation that Europe and the United States are increasingly finding themselves. They're like, man, Putin really signed up to win-win. And we want to help, but we don't want to pay more for oil. Well, we want to help, but we don't want to accidentally, Putin's going to be really mad at us if we use the wrong weapon system. So we're going to wait years to sort of gradually let those weapon systems get deployed, right? We're going to help, but we'll train your brigades, but only with our old gear, right? It's absurd. It is patently absurd. And the West it has to learn these things. It has to learn these lessons the hard way, because eventually the West isn't going to be offered a choice. It's going to have to defend itself, its direct, imminent interests. And the question is, will the West be able to even understand what it means to fight and win a war in the 21st century? Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Huge thank you to the Colonel tier members like Bill Collier, Robert Colburn, Guys, Marnie, and Gina Quester, Chris Gorsuch, Fred Sakaris, L90, Pecha Tororu, all of our Lieutenant tier members. I appreciate you guys so much, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.